Hello and welcome to the Down to Read podcast. This is the first edition of a new series of video podcasts where I'll be discussing great books with avid readers. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the cyberpunk genre, and we'll be talking about topics such as AI, digital consciousness, and mind versus body. I'd love your feedback, so hit up the comments below. Let me know what you liked and what you didn't, what you thought of the book, and whether you agree with any of our theories. So, without further ado, let's get on with the show. Okay, so Grant, thanks very much for joining me on the first video podcast of Down to Read.
No worries.
Today, we're going to be looking at a book you suggested that we read a couple of weeks ago, Neuromancer. But first off, what are you drinking?
So today I am drinking some rave coffee. It is a Burundi Zuba Natural, which is a medium to light roast with notes of pomegranate, citrus, and floral notes as well. Really nice coffee. It's not quite as fruity as some that I've had before. So I find that I can either have it black or just with a bit of oat milk. It goes quite nicely as well. Just depends what mood I'm in, really. But yeah, I'm really enjoying the rave coffees at the minute. I've got a subscription, so I'm getting a new one every month. So it's nice to have like a different flavor. And I always found like I wasn't much of a coffee drinker before, but when I started to get into the much nicer coffees, it was amazing some of the flavors that can actually come out with it.
Yeah, totally agree. I've been
Mhm.
super into rave, as you know, recently as well. I bought 3 bags yesterday. The one I opened this morning it's a Colombian Corozal, so it's also a natural, and it's notes of cassis, blueberry jam, and lavender. It's really, really strong smelling, really pungent. That natural coffee's got that fermented flavor. I went to a coffee tasting once and somebody described it as almost like farmyard smell, but you either love it or hate it, and I'm really into it. So yeah, drinking it just black, and yeah, it's really, really nice. I definitely get the jammy flavor. It's really quite, you can't say the flavor's sticky, but it's got that sort of real like sweet, pungent jammy stuff. So yeah, really into that.
Nice.
Cool. So Neuromancer is the book we're going to be talking about. It's a cyberpunk novel written in 1984 by William Gibson. Just as a brief rundown, it's a really fast-paced book, movie-like scene changes, lots of really visceral action, and some of the main topics that are still really relevant today in it, particularly it's AI. It's a very computer-based, hackery type book. So that's just a little brief rundown. And what did you think of it overall, Grant?
Yeah, I just thought it was amazing. I mean, it's like you said, it's that kind of almost cinematic imagery with it, and just some of the like really like vivid kind of colors that are in there as well. I thought it was really interesting, like the kind of the neons of the strip, and I think there's like a pink kind of cybernetic arm in there somewhere. I think you can see how it's really inspired things like Cyberpunk 2077, because they've really kind of captured that essence, I think, from the scenes that I've seen in the game, although I've not played it. And yeah, it just, like you say, plays out so quickly. It really just read through it really fast. It's not the biggest book, but I got through it quickly.
One thing that was really interesting for me was we've played a game, the board game, what's it called?
Netrunner.
Netrunner, yeah, a few times before. It's like a card games type thing, and it's directly taken from this terminology.
It seems so. Yeah.
Yeah, really fantastic.
And of course, the Matrix.
The Matrix, yeah, that borrows directly from it.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the Matrix is just it's not just that, it's just fascinating generally how this genre has appeared so early on, like in the 80s to be written, and really it's pre-internet era, and a lot of the things that come up in the book just seem so resonant with internet culture today, which is just amazing to kind of predict that so much, considering none of it ever existed before the book was written, really.
That's true. So we're going to run through a few topics now. I've got earmarks and things I want to chat about, and you have too. I'm just going to go down my list, not in any particular relevance, but you're just mentioning internet, and one of the big things with internet at the moment is privacy. What I found really interesting in the book is languages that have evolved, really fascinating. In particular, sign language. They call it a jive or a jibe language. And I just thought, is that how things are going to start moving forward towards? Because with, you've got your Alexa bots listening in. My mum's paranoid about this sort of thing, and it's definitely getting more and more concerns with it. Are we going to move to a less auditory linguistical thing in the future? Is that a prediction? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I don't know. I think non-verbal communication is it's not just that, it's the fact that these machine learning algorithms that process language, they would struggle with like slang basically. And I think that's something that definitely will develop more and more as well. As language develops, it always changes a lot. And I wonder, if machine learning got a lot more advanced and the natural language processing got a lot more advanced, maybe they would be able to translate slang. But I think, a movement towards that as well would be more difficult. It would kind of go against all of this data harvesting. It'd make it more difficult for sure.
It's really interesting because natural language programming is obviously really hot topic at the moment. In my company, we try and use it a lot. We're a survey software, but if language evolves quicker than we can evolve the algorithms to sort of understand like colloquialisms, then that would be a potential way to sort of win back the privacy over our own language.
Yeah, for sure.
Really interesting. Cool. You've got one down here on agency. I've got one on agency as well, actually. Do you wanna start us off on that?
Yeah. So it's interesting in the book because it's like no one really seems to have any agency. There's a lot of drive coming from Wintermute, for instance, for what was the guy's name now? Yeah, so Armitage is the guy that I was trying to say. So he's the kind of drive. But yeah, there's just he's got really nothing to do with it. He's been almost kind of tricked into doing that, and it's the same with a lot of the characters in the book that they've have any of their own agency. Like everything they're doing is being driven by either someone else or some event that's happening to them, and they're just being manipulated by all different characters. So I just thought it was a really interesting topic in the book.
It is. I think the fact so Case has been tricked into it as well. The main character, they this is what I found interesting. Is Case is a hacker. He's down on his luck. He runs these type of heists anyway, or did in the past before he was caught and had his nerves burnt out so that he couldn't do them anymore. And they give him back his nerves and offer him the chance to jack back in and carry on with his hacking career, which from knowing his character, I think he'd definitely be on board with. Didn't sort of need any extra assurance. And yet what they do is they put these, when they're doing surgery on him, they put these sacks of toxins in his body, which will slowly degrade over time. And if he doesn't complete the mission, they won't give him the enzymes that will safely break them down. And he will go back to the sort of person that he was. And I just thought that was overkill. And that's going to what you were saying with agency. They've structured this whole novel so that no one has any choice either way, whether they would buy the character or wouldn't have chosen to do it.
Yeah,
it was really strange.
Yeah, exactly like you say. It's like he would have done it anyway, for sure, because that's what he was desperate to do. It was the lifestyle that he had before, and he goes into this kind of depressive stage when they stop him being able to access the Matrix, and he really just gets really suicidal. Mainly because he can't get there. So yeah, when they suddenly give him this ability, but then force him into it by putting the poison in there, like you said, it's just completely pointless. And really the main drive behind it is, from the novel's kind of perspective, is to just remove any agency from him. He would want to do it anyway, but now he doesn't have the agency because he's forced into doing it. So yeah.
I think the other thing that it does, I've only just thought about, is it actually sows the seeds of doubt in Wintermute and Armitage and the whole sort of, the heads of this heist to make him question it, to make him ask questions. And he almost derails the whole thing a number of times because he's mistrusting everyone. And if you've been given no choice, you immediately start to question things.
Yeah.
It was almost like a whole flaw in the plan, which is very interesting because the plan was, created by this super AI who seems to have thought of everything. But one thing that he definitely doesn't seem to understand is humans and is people. He constantly gets them wrong throughout the thing. And it's almost like, going about this removal of agency. It's a very computerized way of thinking, isn't it? I will do this so that they can't do anything else. It has to be an if, then, then that. There can't be an uncertainty principle there.
Yeah.
It's really interesting when we think about AIs going forward. Obviously, AI has been a huge topic for years, and more we're seeing it in things like the prison system on probation being used to decide who gets probation and what. That's one that I've heard about, but I'm sure there's lots of different use cases. Do we think that it's going to be a case where this sort of computerized thinking becomes, the classic one is that people always argue about automated cars. They say, the one problem is if they were going to hit a kid or if they were going to hit this, a computer wouldn't be able to make the right decision. Kind of like...
Yeah, between the driver's life or the child's life, yeah. It's the chaos, isn't it? It can't predict the chaos, and it's that kind of the human element which deals with chaos well. It's like we can navigate it, whereas a computer, like you say, there's specific things that it can't navigate, and that's why we have supervised learning with machine learning, because it needs that human element. And it's like you mentioned the prison algorithm to predict parole for people, whether they'd reoffend or not. We need the human element to add things like bias, for instance, and it's that kind of chaotic principle that's from a machine's perspective, it's just putting in the data and feeding out results, but it doesn't have that kind of in-between bit which you need, which is the human element. And that's what's missing really with Wintermute, is that like you say, he's got these crazy plans that go back years and years, like getting a boy to take a key and hide it in the back of a drawer in a room in the middle of nowhere,
and then killing that boy.
Yeah, which the family completely forgot about, and the key's been lost for years in this drawer in this back room in the middle of nowhere. Such detailed planning, but then, yeah, like you say, when it comes down to it, this kind of human element just couldn't be predicted. So yeah, really interesting.
There's a lot on there. Just having a look at some of my other notes, I've got mind versus body, which I think is really interesting. It's sort of segues from the AI sort of talk, because it's kind of, for me, a lot of the book is talking about, in the digital age, the importance that we're placing on the mind, whether that's digital or an actual, our minds versus the body. And there seems to be more and more of a separation between them. I've got some great quotes, actually. I just grabbed them up now. But so Case refers to his body relentlessly as meat. And he says, the body was meat. Case fell into the prison of his own flesh. So when he was unable to jack into his, his hacker sort of virtual reality, he considered himself confined to the prison of meat, which was his body. There is this constant battle between the two. And right at the very end, when he's riding that Chinese ice, or icebreaker, which has just gotten through the defenses at the final heist, it has this whole long paragraph, and he basically says that his body and mind becomes one, and he realizes how much more powerful that is. And the other thing that I think is really important is the two AIs, Neuromancer and Wintermute, to me also represent that body-mind thing. Wintermute being the mind, and Neuromancer, who's much more sort of emotionally changed, almost that there's that weird sort of physical location that he inhabits. It's very tangible compared to this elusive Wintermute that moves in and out of bodies and everything like that. So yeah, it seems to track this sort of moving from mind is king and body is kind of just like a fleshy prison, all the way through to this merging of the two and the realizing of how much more powerful that can be. And actually they're not really split. That's kind of like a misnomer. And particularly today, I think we are in the habit of doing this in the modern world with mental health and physical health. Like I'm a culprit for this many years ago, thinking that you could have one without the other. You really need to do both. They're completely intricately woven together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting talking about that separation of mind and body as well, because one thing that I thought was really fascinating was when we're talking about just the mind on its own, it kind of questions what like being is really, because we've got the character, I forget his name now, the entity which Case is using, the old hacker.
Dixie.
So we've got Dixie, we've got Linda Lee, who Case meets when he's trapped by Wintermute in that kind of in-between place with Neuromancer. Yeah. Because actually what we see later on is that once all of the ice is broken right near the end of the book, he sees himself and Linda Lee still in that place with Neuromancer. Yeah. So it's almost like part of his mind is kind of transcended and become this like clone of himself just in the Matrix. So if it, and it's that kind of question of like, if that clone in the Matrix has exactly the same kind of memories as him, it's almost like it's he's split in two at that point. Is it any less real than he is? And the same with Linda Lee. Yeah, exactly. It's almost it's like an exact copy of her really in that world. It's almost like she's been, just before she was killed, frozen, put into the Matrix, and then it's just an exact copy. So what's the difference really? Is she any less real than the Linda Lee that had died? And is that Case any less real? And it's the same with Dixie, because although what's fascinating about him is like he's already dead, so it's just his kind of remnant left in the Matrix, but he still wants to die. He wants to be deleted once everything's finished.
It's really interesting. I mean, I've got a quote here actually. And this is from Dixie. It says, "Me, I'm not human either, but I respond like one, see?" And Case says, "Are you sentient or not?" And it says, "Well, it feels like I am, kid, but I'm really just a bunch of ROM. It's one of them philosophical questions, I guess. But I ain't likely to write you no poem if you follow me." I just think that's it's a really, really interesting thing. What that Dixie wants to be deleted. Yeah, he's a digital copy, but he's a suicidal digital copy. And in some way, Wintermute is as well, and that's why Neuromancer, or from what I understand, he didn't want to lose his agency. That's why he didn't want to merge with his other half of the AI. That's why he was reticent to do it, because it felt like he would be losing, because essentially the two AIs would merge and become a completely different new AI. And where does that kind of leave them? You could almost think about it in a very spiritual way of, or when we die, we become part of a greater whole, but we still want to hold on to our us or our you. Really interesting.
And isn't it fascinating that he mentions poetry as well? Because we talked earlier about the chaos of the human. That's the human element, right? The chaos. He can't do it. He's saying that he's physically unable to write a poem. And I guess that's the difference, isn't it? What we're talking about with Wintermute, the part that he can't fulfill is that human element of almost, being able to create this piece of art. And that's something I think is also an interesting topic when we talk about AI as well, is this like, can AI create art? What's the, does it count as art if, say, a painting's been created by AI? If it's, say, a picture that's been taken and turned into a painting, what's the difference between a human doing it? Why is it, more valid that a human has painted that from something they've seen than a computer doing it?
It's a really important question. And funny enough, I was looking through an NFT marketplace and they were selling AI generated paintings. What are you selling? Like what really is this? I mean,
is it a valid artwork?
Yeah, and there's no real good, I guess, answer to that. I mean, from my side, I think it's fascinating. Would I own a piece of AI artwork? I think so, but but yeah, it's it's a weird place that the world is going to in terms of the art, because they're doing it with media and stories as well. AI can generate many stories. I mean, there was that whole thing about 500 monkeys over 500 years create the works of Shakespeare, right? I think we're getting to the point now where AI can genuinely generate pseudo create new stories. And
There's
that's
an interesting book talking about that by Jorge Luis Borges.
oh yeah.
I think it was called Labyrinths. It was a short story. But there was this library in one of the short stories, and in the library was every conceivable combination of letters and words, and a large part of the library was complete nonsense. But then there were other books there which were masterpieces, and it's just because out of all the random letters that were put into it, some of them would create these great works of art, these great masterpieces, but it was just like random letters that had been put in that happened to make up this piece.
Was phenomenal, yeah. A really interesting nation. You kind of get the feeling like everything's on that scale somewhere, isn't it? We're all just putting something into that big library, and occasionally one of us gets the masterpiece.
Yeah, exactly.
Going back to we're talking about, you mentioned digital consciousness and what's more real and what's not. I mean, it kind of links into the idea of this immortal digital consciousness. So kind of like they've had in it's a theme that I've seen. Was it Black Mirror? Or there's a few different popular culture references to this, but sort of a digital consciousness being constantly uploaded. I was Altered Carbon, which was a book, and is a sci-fi thing. They become almost gods in a sense, because they've lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. Lived, being constantly uploaded into new flesh, into new bodies that are clone grown for the same digital mind. A, are they the same person? And B, is this healthy? In every scene of this book with Terrier Ashpool, who's the sort of person that's been reincarnated multiple times, he's a miserable person. He is,
and perverse as well,
and degraded, and he's living in this tiny room, in a labyrinth of commercial and capital wealth, but that's falling to pieces. And he just has no real life. And it's similar in a number of other pop culture things. These sort of people are seen to be in one light immortal beings, almost godlike, and the other thing, they really don't have that sort of sense of humanity left. And
it's time, isn't it? It's time that I think brings that meaning, because and that's what's interesting in this book, is like people have these little missions, these little quests that they go on, which gives them meaning for things that like they don't have the agency for it, but it's giving their life some kind of meaning, right? For instance, when one thing I noted was with Molly, that they have this Case and her have this relationship, but as soon as all the mission's done, she's realizing that this relationship she's having is affecting her work a bit, so she just gets rid of it because she wants to have this focus. She wants to go, right, I need to bring meaning to my life through having this work, and if I'm not doing well at my work because I'm being distracted, I don't want it anymore. But yeah, it's exactly like you say. So this theme of immortality, like not having meaning to life because there's no time restriction. So for instance, Interview with a Vampire, I forget the vampire's name in that, but he's just depressed. He becomes this vampire, and because he's just got all the time in the world, he doesn't want to be around. He's just doesn't have any meaning or interest in life. And it's the same with Wintermute, actually, that when we get to the end of the book, it's almost anticlimactic. Everything's been building up to this. There's been all this concern. You've got this police force that are specifically there to make sure that AI doesn't have reach this potential of intellect where it can have like decision to do things itself. They're there because they're worried it's going to create this great apocalypse. We get to the end of the book, the mission's complete, and that's it. It just kind of fizzles out. It's so anticlimactic, and I think it's because he's had meaning, he's had reason to do stuff, he's put all these plans in place to try and join himself with Neuromancer. That's the whole point of it. But as soon as he gets it done, that's it. There's no more meaning. He's got all the time in the world. He's not got the restrictions of mortality to give him kind of some sense of meaning, to do something with that time. He's got all the time in the world, so what does it matter if he does nothing?
that's a really important part of the book, I think, that I glossed over. Like, what is driving Wintermute's desire throughout it? I mean, he's an AI. He's essentially omniscient, and not quite omniscient, but he's immortal and has an exceptional amount of power. And as you said, he's just trying to get that extra amount of power, and when he's got it, nothing happens. He doesn't.
I mean, I think he's programmed specifically for that, isn't he? I'm sure it mentioned somewhere that he's meant to want that, but he's incapable of knowing that final password that would join him.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he's given it, but he's unable to ever reach it. And that's what's given him the meaning, is that he's got this kind of unreachable goal. So the fact that he gets through that barrier, then it's just like, right, well, there's no point now.
Yeah, wild stuff. Wild stuff. One thing that you mentioned was Molly, and I think she's a really, really interesting character. Because what's her driving force through all this? I often thought, like, why is she going along with this so much? Does it ever? I can't remember if it ever actually says what Armitage has on her to convince her to do this.
I don't think it has anything. I think that's the thing with her, is that she just enjoys doing what she's doing. She just likes the job. She likes the thrill of it, and that's what gives her meaning in life. And actually, one note about Molly that I wanted to mention that I found is fascinating about her character is that she's impossible to read, and it's because of these lenses that she's got in her eyes.
Oh.
So you can never tell, like, what's going on with her, what her desires are, what her wants are. And I find it funny that she has this relationship with Case, because she almost seems like this kind of, unfeeling character. It's almost like the relationship is helping her to get him on board, and that's just part of the job for her. Whereas for Case, it seems a lot more like closer to love. Like he gets really jealous when she disappears and you can't find her. He goes through this rage, and Molly doesn't seem to care. She just seems very like just calm and collected with everything she's doing. It's all about the job for her.
Yeah, as cyberpunk characters go, she is awesome with her like Wolverine style that come out and how, like, you can't ever see her eyes because of those amazing goggles and things. Also, I find it really interesting the whole like virtual passenger status that Case can do. He can essentially go, was it into her body or into her, is it just into her lenses? But essentially,
I think it's just the lenses so we can see what she's seeing. Yeah.
And that's amazing. But he can feel it. It can't be just a lens, because he can feel what she's feeling.
He can. You're right. Yeah, you're right.
I think it's like a sim stick or something in her neck, or maybe it's something that they all have. And this is crossing that digital flesh boundary. And he feels everything that he's feeling, but he can't even communicate with her. It's just a passenger in it. Again, it goes back to thinking about bodies and minds and that sort of, difference between them there, and which one takes precedent. If one can just be swapped out.
Yeah, exactly. And talking about that mind-body thing as well, one really, really dark part of the book, which I found fascinating but really disturbing, was Molly had kind of been working for a while as a kind of prostitute, but she didn't remember any of the events.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, if she didn't remember it, if she has no memory of that, it's complete blank for her. Although later on it isn't so much, so it's a bit different. But like that initial part, it's like, does it matter? It's like renting out not just her body, but like her mind's just gone as well. So if she's not actually recalling it, she's not got any experience of it. Did it actually happen?
That's fascinating.
From her point of view.
Because it's not just she forgot it, like an amnesia type thing. It's literally they took over her consciousness during those sessions and so she was almost being puppeted. And yet she starts to sort of wake up during these sessions and starts to regain a bit of consciousness, only to find that she's being used by some really perverted people to literally use her nails to slice up people in like some weird brothel situation. And she obviously, clearly she's got some guilt from that, but it's a weird situation because, as you said, was she at fault? She was being puppeted. It's her body, but it wasn't her mind.
And that's where the dilemma is, isn't it? It's that bleeding in of the memories. Is like, at that point it becomes problematic, but beforehand it doesn't matter. Like I say, it's outside of her experience as a human. So would you think of it as, from her point of view, she's done these perverse acts. She doesn't know what happened with the ones earlier on. So is it actually perverse? Does it matter? But then, like you say, as it starts to bleed in later on and she realizes they're doing some really like horrible, like kind of snuffy things with her, then it becomes problematic. But she doesn't seem super disturbed by it.
No.
And I think, part of the reason for that maybe is because that's what helps her to get out of that situation and have a bit more freedom, because she escaped that life then.
Absolutely.
So maybe that's why, and it's part of that, same kind of, it's in line with her character, which is she's all about just, being out there for herself, getting the job done, and doing these kind of, almost ninja missions that she does for people.
You could argue that this kind of glossing over the depth of her character is a bit of a flaw in the book, in the sense that it's got some very deep male characters with a lot of backstory and history, and the 2 or 3 female characters either have a very we could read into it, but a very surface level emotion, or they just get killed, like Linda Lee.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite interesting how little depth we go into with the female characters.
You could almost say it's misogynistic from that point of view, because really the female characters are just used, aren't they? Linda Lee, she's just used at the start and then she's killed. Molly, she's being used by all of these different kind of prostitution rings. Lady 3 Jane, what real part does she have in it? Her father, Tessier Ashport, he's got a clone of her, which he, every now and then he wakes up, has sex with her, and then just kills her.
It's so brutal when you say it like that, isn't it? Like, oh my God. Yeah, they're not treated well in the book at all when you look back on it. Oh man. Just on a change of pace, I just had a quick look in my notes, and one of the things I thought was really interesting was when they operate on Case in the early parts of the book, they change his spleen for one, or some of his organs. I think they mentioned spleen, for one that doesn't uptake or can't be affected by drugs. He's a drug user, particularly for his depressive stage, and they basically force him to go clean. And I know this isn't necessarily technology we have now, but would that be something that you can see happening in the future? Is that ethical? There's just so many questions that throw up around me about like that. I can see that being in certain countries a forced thing. If we get to the stage where we can swap organs in and out, people might choose it, obviously, but as a forced sort of government program, it sounds like some sort of dystopian nightmare.
Yeah, and it's that kind of free will, isn't it? Again, it's like saying that, it's taken away another part of his agency. It's that kind of ability to go off the track of the mission, because he does manage to find it. And again, it's another part that hasn't been predicted, isn't it? That he's been put in this organ that stopped him doing any drugs. It stops him going off the rails so that he can just get on with his work and do the mission properly. But he still manages to find this kind of dark underbelly on the station, under the strip, and he finds these people, which funnily enough as well have been have some experience with Lady 3 Jane, which I thought was interesting, that at this opposite end of the wealth spectrum, she's just got no meaning, no interest in life, so she's hanging out with these kind of dark underbelly people to just do drugs with them to try and find something interesting to do. But coming back to the topic, that I think it's part of that agency thing, that it's been taken away from him, but then he just still finds this way to go, right, there's a drug that actually it doesn't matter, it's not going to be blocked by this. Yeah exactly.
Oh, insane. You've got a few more notes on it. I forgot we haven't come back to you a few times. Do you want to choose one of them? You've got love, questioning reality.
I mean, I think we've covered a lot of it anyway, to be honest, but definitely questioning reality, because when we look at these places like the Strip, for instance, and what was the name of the guy that can project things into people's minds, or these kind of perverse images, because we haven't talked about him much. It's augmented reality, really, isn't it, what he's doing? And he's almost
on people. He's
almost this kind of this in-between person of like, you know, the visceral normal world, the meat world, as Case puts it, and the Matrix. He's kind of, you know, projecting these horrible images a lot of the time for people to see, and it's blending between realities there. And I think he's an interesting character for that.
Yeah, his name's Peter. I just remembered Peter.
Peter, that's the one. Yeah. But really, even when you look at, so for instance, in the Sprawl, you know, they've got all. What I thought was really fascinating was that video game arcade.
Yeah.
But they're not. They seem like they're almost, yeah, projected out into things. So it's almost like really like augmented reality with them, because the real world in the Sprawl just seems really gruesome and horrible. You know, people aren't happy there. I think it's, you know, where people can't go, that they can't access all of these things. They can't access the Matrix. They can't go to the, for instance, the space station with this kind of Las Vegas-y type neon lighting everywhere. But again, that almost seems like it's in between realities, because it's for show, isn't it? It's this kind of facade with all of these lights and the, you know, the flashing things, very much like what Las Vegas is. I think it's just this facade of beauty and amazement, when really there's this kind of dark, visceral reality behind it. And it's just really interesting, yeah, the way that it plays between realities, that when Case, for instance, is trapped in that place, it seems just like really real. You know, they've still got to eat, for instance. All this food is just, you know, luckily washed up through the sea, and that they're eating, but it's not very pleasant food. It's just enough to sustain them. But it just seems very, even in that world, you know, it's really difficult for him to distinguish whether or not it's reality. Because I remember when I was reading it, when he was first in that scene, I thought, has he just been, you know, lost some part of his memory and been dumped on a beach somewhere because they're done with him? Or is this, you know, something else that's going on here? So yeah, it's just fascinating. Where is the line? You know, what is real, what isn't real? And when we get to the point where, you know, everything is so sophisticated, like this kind of Matrix world, really, again, thinking like the film The Matrix, you know, that does that really well. What is actually real? You know, like when he jumps into Molly's body, he can feel everything, he can see everything she can see, he can hear all those things. You know, what is the difference?
It's very fascinating, and particularly that augmentation. You know, we have at the moment we have this binary in our head between reality and virtual. Well, this augmentation or augmented reality, or augmented bodies, where they're, you know, it's not a virtual body, but it's starting to become digital in certain places, whether it's organs or the lenses that Molly have, or the sim sticks that allow them to, you know, move brains in and out of people, minds in and out of people's bodies. That's really blurring the line. It's creating this whole, you know, sort of different slider scale between what we'd consider normal reality and virtual reality. And yeah, it just makes it impossible to sort of tell where one stops and the other ends, to the point where
I thought of a great example, sorry, just while it's still in my head. So we talked about earlier about Molly and the fact that she didn't experience those things when she was prostituting herself. But then when Peter, when he displays that image of her in front of everyone, and he's like, you know, making love to her, and then she's ripping him up with her claws, she's really offended by it, like really upset by it. She feels violated by it. She's not experienced, you know, she's not actually had it done to her, but by seeing it and almost experiencing that vision, she's then really offended. Whereas when she's doing, you know, the prostitution, doesn't care about it.
I mean, to say offended, she basically says, "I'm going to murder Peter."
And she does, and she does, yeah.
And there's so much in this book. I think we've probably talked for probably about 45 minutes already, and I think we could go on and on, but I think we'll probably leave it there. It has been fantastic chatting to you about this, and I'm really glad you suggested we read this book, because I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'll probably pick up another couple of, Gibson's got quite a few other books I might pick up. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me on the Down to Read podcast, and we'll be seeing you next time.
No problem. Enjoyed to be here. Thanks.